8:37 Central African time. You're still tuned in to News and Views of myself, Salailo Makwidire. And we're going to be switching gears to a very, very interesting conversation. South Africa's military relationship with Russia is once again under the spotlight. The country's army chief, Lieutenant General Lawrence Mbata, has held talks with senior Russian military officials in Moscow this past week, with both sides agreeing to strengthen cooperation between their land forces. The discussions from what we're gathering, included joint projects aimed at improving military readiness, while the South African delegation is also expected to visit Russian military academies and defense companies. But this is interesting because the world is currently divided by the war in Ukraine, amongst others, but in this specific case, the war in Ukraine, and there are growing tensions between Russia and the West. Is this more about military cooperation? What does South Africa stand to gain? And could closer ties with Russia come with diplomatic or economic risks? We'll be trying to unpack and answer some of those questions. And we're joined by Chris Hattingh, Executive Director at the Center for Risk Analysis, who's going to be giving us more insight on that. Chris, good morning and welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, pleasure's all ours. Chris, I want to jump right into it. Just how significant is this visit by South Africa's army chief to Russia? Is this, from how you're viewing it, routine military cooperation, or does it signal a deeper strategic relationship between South Africa and Russia?
So it's not an arms deal, and for South Africans, we obviously have lots of familiarity with arms deals and the implications thereof. So it's not an arms deal, so it's not that deep a level of cooperation. The visit, it covered things like training, professional military education, officer development, and leadership at the Moscow Combined Arms School. South Africa will have similar engagements with other countries, so there's nothing untoward in that regard. It is interesting that it is Lieutenant General Mbata's second visit to Moscow. The first was in May of 2023. The big question here is around optics. So, for South Africa, professing in its foreign policy around things like non alignment and neutrality, especially with the conflict in Ukraine, it would boost South Africa's claim to be neutral and to be non-aligned if it now also if either Lieutenant General Mbata or others, if they visited other countries including Ukraine and engage with their militaries on a similar level. So don't sign deep arms deals or deep sort of agreements like that, but go to learn, go to engage, go to look at skill sharing programs, go to look at maybe things around how different exercises are conducted, go and to conduct visits such as that. That would then put more credibility behind South Africa's claims of neutrality. So I'm not saying this visit in and of itself means South Africa is hard aligned to Moscow, to Russia, but it's another sort of example in the series where, especially in Washington and in Brussels, politicians and policymakers will point to South Africa and say, look, you're only going to visit a country like Russia. Why aren't you engaging with other countries in your region and indeed around the world if you profess to be non-aligned?
I want to expand exactly on that point because, as you mentioned, South Africa has repeatedly described its foreign policy and foreign position as being non-aligned. Does it now make it a bit more difficult to defend that internationally? And you mentioned the US aspect also, because they've been quite coming out strong with regards to who South Africa is leaning to. I mean, Iran also being one of those that the US has been quite vocal about our relations with them. Now Russia, are we at a position where this non-aligned position that we always claim is increasingly becoming harder and harder to defend and to stand by?
I think visits such as this and some of the language that Russia also expressed, it does make it a bit more difficult. So if you look at, for example, at this latest visit, Russian Colonel General Alexander Matovnikov, he said that South Africa's political and military leadership, he said he praised them for their quote unquote firm position on Russia. So that's Moscow that's characterizing South Africa's position towards Russia as aligned and not neutral. And there hasn't been any statement or any indication from the SANDF or from DIRCO or any other representative of the South African government to go against that. So is that a tacit endorsement or not? Do they feel maybe that's not such a big deal? But it will be picked up in places like Washington and Brussels and elsewhere. Perhaps also a bit of a risk issue here for South Africa professing non alignment is how South Africa tends to be silent or relatively silent on issues in our own immediate region over many years. So if you look at things like for years, human rights abuses in countries like Zimbabwe, conflict across the African continent, South Africa's relative, not silence, but not really taking action. If you look at what's been happening over many decades in the Sudan, conflict in Ethiopia, South Africa, through itself and through the African Union, will talk about human rights and concerns and respect for human rights and for democracy and the rule of law. But when those violations occur, South Africa does not necessarily use its weight to condemn those violations on its own continent. And again, that will be used to say, look, South Africa talks about respecting universal human rights, being non aligned, wanting to protect border security, democracy, the rule of law all over the world. But when push comes to shove, South Africa does not then put its money where its mouth is.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very important point. I want to come back to the relationship with Russia, because we all know historically it's been long-standing. The political ties, the ANC majority of the Stroll Star was having been trained in Russia. Some even studied there. There's also the BRICS aspect of it. Just looking at that relationship, just how much of it would you say is rooted in history, and how much of it is about present day strategic interests? Does South Africa have vested interests in Russia, and vice versa in modern day diplomatic circles?
I think that's a very good point to highlight around the historical ties for the ANC with Russia. Of course, the ANC forced into exile for so many years and decades by the National Party apartheid government. Those relationships, those ties, emotionally and especially ideologically, between the ANC and Russia were built up. There is a question there where you had also support from various players in Ukraine, in Kiev. It was part of the Soviet Union, but they also supported the struggle, and they provided support to the ANC. So then the question will be to the ANC at this point in time. Look, yes, Russia did support you materially in other ways, logistics, but so did players in places like Ukraine. So you should, if you want if you want to build on that historical relationship and place value on it, as one should for historical friendships and alliances, then do so consistently. So there's a bit of a gap there for the ANC. But number two, maybe if one looks at the current moment, there's sort of two elements. So the soft power element, I think South Africa still enjoys a lot of weight in the soft power arena. That's things like diplomacy through sports and culture and those kinds of exchanges. So that could be an important element for the ANC to continue to pursue in this relationship with Russia. But that being said, you're also seeing in the geopolitical moment now in 2026 increasing rise of the use of hard power. And here we look at, especially at the United States, where if you look at what the United States did with former president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, earlier this year when they extricated him from Venezuela, if you look at the conflict at the moment between the US, Israel, and Iran, the US is no longer sort of wary or apologizing for using hard power. In that kind of world, South Africa needs to build up its own military capacities. And in that regard, there is a bit of a doubt about this relationship with Russia, because if you just look at the state of the South African National Defense Force from a force readiness point of view, from a funding point of view, from mandate problems, what is the actual mandate of the SANDF? If you look at the lack of equipment and training for personnel in the SANDF, it's arguable that the relationship with Russia doesn't have that kind of benefit to South Africa. There you look at things like possibly the relationship again with Ukraine. If you look at the kind of military interventions and technological advances that they've been making in the conflict with Russia, they've got limited resources, but they're doing very well. For a country like South Africa with limited resources but serious regional security concerns, building up the capacity of the South African National Defence Force. There's every reason to engage with various countries around the world and to learn from them, but don't just focus on countries like Russia and Iran.
I want us to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to expand a bit on that. And I think it's very, very important to the fact that the SANDF has faced concerns, as you mentioned, around funding, the aging in infrastructure and equipment that we have, and just general operational readiness. Then when we come back, I want to touch on what could then be the benefits of this visit if Russia can't offer some practical benefits to South Africa's defense force. We'll take a quick break and then we'll expand a bit after this.
We work hard to build our homes, businesses, and futures. Protecting them shouldn't mean compromising the values that matter most. ACNE Group of Companies, a Muslim-owned business, offers our short-term diamond insurance covers founded on ethical principles, transparency, integrity, and responsible service. This allows us to provide insurance solutions that align with ethical values while maintaining the protection and service standards you expect. To ensure complete peace of mind, all premiums, claims, and premium investment funds are managed through designated Sharia-compliant bank accounts, reflecting our ongoing commitment to ethical and responsible financial practices. From your first inquiry to the moment you need to claim, we are committed to providing professional, transparent, and reliable support. Choose insurance that reflects your values while giving you confidence and peace of mind. Speak to ACNE Group of Companies today to learn more about our commercial, engineering, professional indemnity, and liability diamond insurance covers. Call Rafik Isaacs on 084-822-6570. ACNE Group of Companies comprises authorized financial services providers under FSP numbers 43281, 4553, and 45915. Products are underwritten by New National Assurance Company Limited, FSP number 2603.
Almost 1 in 5 South African children attend school each day without having eaten breakfast. This seriously affects their ability to concentrate and understand lessons. The Al Imdad Foundation's Make Breakfast Possible campaign allows learners to enjoy a high-energy cereal at the start of the school day. Help children to focus on learning and not hunger. Let's make breakfast possible today. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness. And every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Gaza needs your support more than ever. Homes have been shattered and families have lost everything. With your support, our teams are delivering clean water tankers, feeding the hungry, and assisting orphans who have no one left. Let us give Gaza whatever help we can. African Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
8:51 Central African time. And if you just joined us, we're still in conversation with Chris Hattingh, Executive Director at the Center for Risk Analysis, who's joining us to unpack really interesting developments. South Africa and Russia seemingly strengthening military ties. This is following high-level discussions out in Moscow. And we're trying to understand what this great partnership could mean for South Africa's foreign policy, what could mean for defense strategy and relationships with other global powers. And Chris, thank you so much for staying with us. Before we went on to that short break, you mentioned something quite important, the fact that the SANDF has faced some serious concerns around funding, aging equipment, and general operational readiness. And then my next question would then be, could a closer cooperation with Russia offer any kind of practical benefits to South Africa's defense force? Could maybe assessing Russian military academies and some of their expertise on defense technology help address some of the challenges that we're facing?
I think there could be an element of that. So if you look at basic sort of military to military training exercises, if you look at things like South Africa's participation in BRICS and Russia's participation in BRICS as well, the BRICS countries conducting these sort of visits and exercises with each other, there could be an element of benefit there to the SANDF. There is a question around different kinds of systems, and I know it's not exactly, comparing apples to apples, but if you think about something like the Microsoft Office, Microsoft platform versus Mac, if your military system or software, as it were, is based on using one of those systems, and then you conduct training exercises and try and incorporate some of those learnings from a military that uses a different kind of system, it then does lessen some of that benefit and some of that carryover. It doesn't mean that some of the principles and the sort of macro ideas can't be carried over, can't be used in terms of training. But there is a question just around what kind of system South Africa wants to use and whether that then would allow for the integration of specific elements of what the Russian military has been doing and is doing in different kinds of theaters and different kinds of instances. So as a principle and as a concept, I do think you're right to highlight that there is potential benefit from a sort of military to military training point of view. The question is around exactly what kind of way one does that. And maybe just a last point on this, for South Africa and the state of the SANDF, there's a serious challenge in terms of getting the force back onto a sort of fighting footing, as it were, defending our borders, for the Navy to defend and protect shipping that comes around the Cape, which likely is going to continue at a high level for as long as the conflict in the Middle East between the US, Israel, and Iran continues and the Strait of Hormuz is closed. There is a question there around getting equipment. And if you look at partnerships with countries like South Korea, like France, they might be more wary to provide, to sign equipment and technology transfer agreements if South Africa's military is too closely integrated with or similar to the Russian military. So there is a question there for South Africa, just long term. You lessen your pool of available equipment and technology if you engage and integrate more with a military like Russia's or China's, and then maybe lose out at some other opportunities. But it's always a sort of cost-benefit analysis.
I want to wrap up with a question from our listener here. They're saying, good morning, Selailo, and your guest, Chris. Please ask Chris if South Africa's non-aligned policy is no longer feasible. We should just pick a side by now, choose whether we're going east or west and stick to that instead of being all over like we're confused. What do you make of that? Is it time to be clear on our foreign policy? I mean, I think they're making quite a good point. This non-alignment thing doesn't seem to be working out anymore.
I think it is a good point, but I don't think the sort of geopolitical and let's call it geomilitary reality for the next decade or two, I don't think it's going to allow for being in just one camp. So the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, earlier this year at Davos, he talked about the importance of middle powers, countries like Canada, like South Africa, many European countries, many countries in Southeast Asia, like South Korea, Indonesia, maybe Australia as well. how these countries are going to increasingly find themselves having to navigate this current moment where the US is sort of retreating and retracting from conducting, in its view, global defense and protecting global trade on its own terms. It's demanding more extractions from countries in their trade agreements with the US, not least of which South Africa, of course, which continues to face high tariffs. China, for its part, it wants to play the role of sort of global stabilizer, use its role to protect the global economy. But its agreements also with countries come with their own conditions, terms and conditions attached. We've seen various infrastructure investments by China into African countries, but they come with certain requirements and demands from Beijing. So for countries like South Africa, these middle powers, if you place yourself in a state where you grow your local economy, you make yourself attractive for investment, you've got a capable military and defense force, you create employment and lower your unemployment rate. There's every opportunity to play these two major superpowers off each other, mainly the US and China, but also to build new kinds of investment and trading and military relationships where one might not have expected it. So with countries in Latin America, for example, with Canada, with Mexico, who are increasingly concerned about their relationship with the US, building relationships along these lines with countries in the European Union, where we share lots of values along the lines of democracy, the rule of law, human rights, etc. So it's going to be difficult. I'm not trying to sort of understate the moment, but I don't think it's going to, unfortunately, be as easy as just aligning with either the US or China. I think it's going to be a more complicated decade, at least, going forward. Those countries that are capable of doing so, I think they're going to benefit from more growth and more investment. But you've got to focus on your sort of domestic policy space first, make sure that you're as resilient, as strong as possible, your institutions are strong, that you can then take advantage of when these different kinds of new global areas of opportunity emerge.
There we go. Chris Hattingh, Executive Director at the Center for Risk Analysis. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
There we go. And yeah, I think a very, very interesting conversation. And maybe you can engage with us on that last question from our listener. Our line 01168000355. On WhatsApp, you can send us a voice note or a text on 0617660355. Do you think South Africa should just choose a side? Are you East? Are you West? Or do you agree with Chris' analysis, the fact that there's going to be an increased importance on middle powers, non-aligned powers, countries like South Africa, like Canada, Australia, and others. Well, you can just be non-aligned. It works. But seeing where South Africa's been leaning in the last couple of years, are we still really non-aligned? Do you believe we're still a middle power? I don't know. You can engage with us. Going to take a quick break. News and views will continue after this.